What is up, you guys? Welcome back to my channel, and if you're new here, just welcome. My name is Gemma Jade. I am not feeling too well today, so bear with the look. Just got to get through this. Today I'm covering the third installment of my Men in Black series. It's weird because I said in the first video I ever did that they really terrified me almost as much as BEK. And then in the second video, I'm like, I'm not so scared of them anymore, but I came across something that absolutely terrified me. Now, I am going to talk about MIBs in this video, but I'm also going to talk about something else that's been kind of connected to the MIB, but we're not really sure if it's MIB or not. But it's super terrifying, and when I saw it, I was like, oh my goodness, I have to share with you guys. So, let's get started. Let's jump right in. On November 2nd, 1966, in Parkersburg, West Virginia, a man named Woodrow or Woody Derenberger was driving home on Interstate 77 just before 7:30 p.m. He was coming home from work. He saw in his rearview mirror that the car behind him was coming up really close on him and basically riding his bumper. It was actually coming up on him so fast that Woody was afraid that it was going to actually crash into him. When the car that was coming up behind him suddenly passed him at a very high rate of speed, Woody saw what was behind this car and probably making it speed up onto him as fast as it was. He saw something terrifying and unbelievable. This is when he saw a UFO. The UFO suddenly swerved in front of Woody's truck, forcing him to come to a complete stop. But he said he was very specific about saying that it didn't force him to like slam on his brakes. It went up enough that although he had no room to get around it, whichever way he would have went, it kind of blocked the whole highway. It did give him enough room to come to a safe and complete stop. According to Derenberger, the very second his car came to a complete stop, a door opened up on the side of this craft, and something that from far away, from his point of view, looked like a man stepped out and started approaching his truck. This man walked across the front of his truck and stopped at his passenger side window. At this point, the man asked Derenberger to roll the passenger side window down for him, which Derenberger complied. Then he started asking Woody a series of questions. The first one was, quote, "What are you called?" End quote. The next question was followed by a statement with the man saying, quote, "Why are you frightened? Don't be frightened. We wish you no harm. We mean you no harm, and we wish you only happiness," end quote. Woody gave the man his name and then asked him for his name, and the man said his name was Indrid Cold. Cold then explained, quote, "We are collecting information and trying to learn more about the human race," end quote. Now understand, all of this was happening mentally with Woody speaking out all of the questions being asked by Cold. So Cold was simply looking at Woody and telepathically asking these questions. So Woody would say, "What are you called?" Woody Derenberger. "Why are you frightened? Don't be frightened." It was all coming out of Woody's mouth, which this was the first thing that I, forget the UFO coming up behind him, forget this man-looking thing coming out. This is the first thing that really creeped me out about this. So if this thing had a voice, it never actually revealed it. They maintained eye contact the entire time, and all of it was mentally, telepathically. So after exchanging hellos and bizarre pleasantries, Indrid Cold telepathically gestured towards the lights off the highway of the city of Parkersburg, West Virginia, where Woody was traveling to and where he lived. As he mentally gestured towards these lights, he asked Woody, "What is that?" To which Woody told him that's the town of Parkersburg. I know this all seems very strange, but just bear with me. You know I'm going somewhere with it. This is just really important, the back and forth that they had. Cold then asked a seemingly strange question when he asked Woody, quote, "Do all of the people live there?" End quote. To which Woody says he tried to explain what a city or a town was, and Cold responded, "Where I'm from, we call that a gathering, so a community." Woody explained that was more the area with all the stores and the shops, and some people lived there, but there were outlying communities where the people technically lived. And Indrid said they called that a gathering where he was from. So Woody was terribly frightened at this point and had no idea what the heck was going on. And Colt kept trying to reassure him, like, don't be scared. We come in peace, you know, all of that stuff. But obviously Woody wasn't sure if he should buy it or not. I mean, this has to be a terrifying ordeal, experience. Woody stated that Colt this entire time gave off nothing but a very relaxed, calm, and warm energy. And though he never spoke, as I said, he did have this weird and kind of creepy, but kind of friendly too, grin on his face. After about 2 to 3 minutes of this conversation going back and forth, Cole turned to Woody and said, quote, "We will see you again," end quote, and walked back onto his ship. He entered back into the side door from which he came, and after hovering in the air for about a second or two, the ship took off straight up into the air at a very high rate of speed. Woody later explained that there seemed to be no lights emanating from this craft. The only light that he could see on the craft were the lights from his headlights. He said it was a charcoal color and semi-metallic, and he could tell this by the way it glistened in the headlights of his truck. In describing what Indrid Cold was wearing, Woody said he had a black top coat buttoned almost all the way up, and it was similar to the one Woody himself had owned. He said underneath around this area, you can see a metallic gray type of one-piece suit. I don't know how he knew it was a one-piece suit, but he saw this as the undergarment. When asked what Indrid's Cold skin looked like, Woody said he was extremely deeply tanned, but not inhumanly so. He just looked like somebody who had been out in the sun and had a really nice, deep, healthy tan going. Woody said over and over that had it not been for the strange telepathy and seeing Cold coming out of this craft, had he been walking down the street, he could have been mistaken for another human. He looked entirely human. There were other people who may or may not have had encounters with Indrid Cold, who came to be known also as the Grinning Man, and there were sketches drawn and even a supposed picture, but we'll get to that a little bit later on in this video. I'm telling you guys, the descriptions vary quite wildly. Woody said that Cold's hair was dark brown and combed straight back, and he had regular facial features. Cold appeared to be approximately 35 to 40 years old. Now, there was a sighting of Indrid Cold, allegedly, a couple of weeks before Woody Derenberger's encounter with him, but I couldn't find a lot of information on it. Woody's is the main encounter with Indrid Cold, and you'll see why a little bit later on, but here's everything that I could come up with. The very first ever known reported sighting of Indrid Cold, or the Grinning Man, took place on October 16th, 1966 in Elizabeth, New Jersey. Two boys, Martin Mouse Munov and James Jimmy Yanchitis, I could be pronouncing that wrong, were walking down 4th Street when they claimed they saw a, quote, surreal-looking man, end quote, standing behind a nearby fence. They said what stood out most about this extremely large man was the giant grin he had plastered on his face the entire time these two young kids had seen him. Apparently, Jimmy, who said this man was, quote, the biggest man I ever saw, end quote, saw the figure first and wasted no time in letting his friend Mouse know, like, hey, do you see this creepily grinning gigantic bear of a man standing behind that fence and just staring at us? The thing was, they had no idea if the man was there all along or if he had just suddenly appeared, because they weren't really paying attention. It was like they didn't notice him there, but they thought that they would have definitely noticed this guy. They reported that this figure was clad in green and was reflecting the stoplight that was above it. So again, a metallic kind of one-piece suit, but this time all green. The two boys were scared out of their wits, freaking out, and they just took off running before this emerald apparition could even have a chance to give chase. There were several other eyewitness reports in the same general vicinity of Jimmy and Mouse's sighting of this, quote, green man, end quote, and they all said the same thing. They were chased down by this giant green man. Green not being the color of his skin, but this very, I'm assuming, bright green one-piece suit, metallic, that he was wearing, right? So there were a few more sightings in and around the Elizabeth, New Jersey area. Now, here's a little bit of my opinion. Was this the same entity, Indrid Cold, as Woody Derenberger had seen a few weeks later approach his car from the spacecraft? Aside from the giant grin on his face, I don't see what is similar about these encounters. Indrid Cold seemed like a very peaceful, calm, relaxed kind of alien guy, even though he had a huge weird grin on his face the whole time. He was wearing gray, he had human features, a top coat, and there was nothing much said about how him being like super huge, right? I'm not exactly sure, again, aside from the grin, how this sighting got grouped in with Indrid Cold, but it did. Just like I'm not sure how Indrid Cold got grouped in with the MIB, but here we are. Apparently, though, after a few years, Jimmy and Mouse recalled that the entity or man that they saw had no ears and no nose. And they like suddenly remembered this all these years later. So obviously it wasn't Indrid Cold. But what I'm wondering is, just on a side note, whatever entity they saw, did it take their kind of memory away and put a nose and ears on itself? Do you guys understand what I'm saying? Like, does that make sense? Did it change their memory and all of a sudden one day they snapped out of it? The other people too were reporting that the entity they saw, the green entity that chased them, the green man, had no nose or ears. On the other hand, does this really scream credible? Don't you think having no ears and no nose is something you would have noticed despite the bright green one-piece suit and it being a giant, basically? I mean, no ears and no nose. That would probably be the first thing I reported when reporting this sighting. Like, that would be the first thing I noticed. So to me, their whole sighting just doesn't cry credible. To me, I feel it's more like, and I can't prove this because I don't have exact dates and times of when these other witnesses saw this entity. It seems like two young teenage kids heard that people were claiming to be chased by a green man, looked a little bit at the description, and then said that they had encountered the same entity. I don't know, though. Maybe they'd reported theirs first. It's all a little vague. This happened in the 1960s, so record keeping for the police stations, paranormal community, obviously wasn't as advanced as it is now. There was actually a third sighting right around the same time in 1966 in West Virginia. Not in Parkersburg, though. The Lilly family had been reporting some poltergeist activity in their home. The Lilly's daughter woke up one night in the middle of the night and allegedly saw a strange man standing over her. She said, quote, "It was a man, a very big man, very broad. I couldn't see his face very well, but I could see that he was grinning at me. He walked around the bed and stood right over me. I screamed again and hid under the covers. When I looked again, he was gone," end quote. Again, why is this being grouped in with the Indrid Cold sightings? And why is this being grouped in with the green entity from New Jersey if that entity had no nose or ears? I don't know, but this was a documentary on the Men in Black and Indrid Cold, and it was all just grouped in. So I'm really interested in seeing what you guys think, or even what you guys know beyond this documentary and the research that I did. If you guys know anything else that I don't, be sure and leave a comment, because this was so creepy to me and so incredibly interesting. It feels more to me like the Lilly's daughter's encounter was some kind of spirit or ghost, poltergeist activity, and disappearing in thin air. I mean, so far Indrid Cold and the green entity might have appeared, but disappeared, I don't know. I think what we're dealing with here is maybe a rash of all different kind of UFO or alien phenomenon that got grouped into one because back then it was so new, right? I mean, it had to be the same entity. Who wants to believe that there's 3 or 4 of these different alien races running around terrorizing people? And I'm convinced what the Lilies saw was just a plain old poltergeist, a plain old ghost. I know you don't normally see poltergeists, but it doesn't mean that you can't ever see one. See what's causing the poltergeist activity. Darren Berger stated that he had never before believed in aliens or flying saucers, UFOs, but after his encounter that night with Indrid Cold, he not only believed, but he knew with absolute certainty that that's what he had encountered. He knew in his heart of hearts, in his mind, that Indrid Cold was some kind of alien. Let's get sidetracked for a few minutes and talk about the Men in Black themselves. Some experts believe that these sinister black-clad and official-looking men are extraterrestrials themselves. A type of alien cleanup crew, if you will, that follow behind any UFO or alien activity or phenomenon that is seen by witnesses and silence the witnesses by any means necessary. They're also known to take, by force if necessary, any and all evidence of such things like encounters, and they need to make sure that whatever this evidence is never analyzed or seen by anybody else, and the recountings of the witnesses never get to be notorious, like no public notoriety, to silence them and to get any and all evidence of what the witness had seen. They don't want any of this stuff reaching the general public, right? The thing is, though, even people who have had an alien encounter or have experienced or witnessed some kind of UFO phenomenon, even if that person was scared or for whatever reason decided to never tell anybody else, they still get visits from the Men in Black. So how do the MIB know if only the witnesses themselves are privy to the information? Maybe only the witnesses themselves are not privy. Maybe whatever is aboard these crafts that they're seeing is also privy that they saw. To me, that backs up the thought that the MIB themselves are in fact a form of alien race. This seems to be backed up by numerous accounts of people who have had encounters with the Men in Black, stating that they were somehow off, they had strange features. So many odd and bizarre things about the Men in Black that can't be explained as human defect, right? Like having no ears, no nose, having painted on lips with red lipstick, not moving their mouths, not being familiar with something like a cup of Jell-O or a fork, being anemic looking and pale, having eyes that are too large, having no facial hair, including eyebrows or eyelashes. It just goes on and on. Being ridiculously tall, walking as though they're wearing, a human suit. It goes on and on about these strange and bizarre reports of what the MIB look like. It's almost as if they haven't quite mastered human form yet. To describe them physically a bit further, many witnesses say they look emaciated. They look exactly as what they are, aliens playing at being human. So, remember how Indrid Cold told Woody he'd be seeing him again? He wasn't lying. Here's testimony taken directly from Woody's audio interview about his many and various encounters with Indrid Cold. And don't worry, after I finish with Cold, we'll move on to MIB encounters. It's just that this entity, this Indrid Cold, whoever or whatever he was, completely fascinates me. I couldn't stop listening to the tapes. I couldn't stop watching the reenactments. So anyways, what Cold actually said on that night as he walked back into his ship was, quote, "We will be seeing you again," end quote. Even though it was only Cold that Woody had seen. However, there were no windows or lights that he could see on the ship Cold came from. So there very well could have been other beings that looked like Indrid Cold or any other kind of alien being on those ships that he just didn't see that night. So let's travel back to that night in Parkersburg, West Virginia in November of 1966, just for a few minutes. Woody drove straight home after his encounter and walked through the door shaking and pale-skinned. His children, as they did every night, ran up to the door to greet him, give him a hug and a kiss, like, "Daddy's home, yay!" Only this night was different. Woody did not hug or kiss his children. He barely even said hello and acknowledged them. He told them to immediately go straight to their rooms. I watched an interview with his daughter, Tanya, and she said that this encounter altered and forever changed not only her father's life, but the entire family's forever. She said when she and her older brother were sent up to their room, she, being a little kid wanting to know what was going on, obviously she sensed something was wrong, she crept back to the top of the stairs and eavesdropped on her parents. She heard her father start to recount the story of what had just happened to him on his way home from work, the story of how he met Indrid Cold, or was approached by Indrid Cold. Her mother responded, quote, "If you're trying to scare me, you're doing a great job," end quote. And she seemed a little irritated. When Woody insisted that's what happened, his wife picked up the phone and called the local sheriff. Tanya remembered how her mother's hands were shaking when she made the phone call to the sheriff, to the point where she could barely dial the number. And she also said she will never forget how her father described this, quote, "spooky looking and scary," end quote, grin on the man's face the entire time he was interacting with him. I just picture this in my head and it totally creeps me out, because I remember years ago, it must be like 11, 12 years ago, I saw some kind of paranormal show and this guy had said he was stalked and kind of haunted by his own demon, and this demon would, in the middle of the night when he was a young kid, like peer around corners and just grin with sharp, razor sharp teeth, and the grin would go all the way up to here and be like this wide. And that's all I can think of. There was nothing sharp about Indrid's teeth. I'm not saying that's what he looked like, but that's all I can think about is this demonic grin when I think of this creepy, scary smile Cold had on his face that entire time. Also, according to Tanya, Cold told Woody that he was a searcher, as in searching for information as to life on Earth, about human beings. Woody's biggest fear about the entire first encounter was how Indrid said he'd be seeing him again. When asked in his interview with the sheriff if he thought that he would in fact be seeing this entity or this man again, Woody answered that he did believe him, that he would see him again, but he definitely did not want to see him again. He just wanted to forget the whole thing and never have to deal with this experience again. Upon his return home that night, Woody's wife said about his appearance, quote, "He could not have been any whiter had he been lying in a coffin," end quote. So as I stated before, Cole did in fact pay multiple visits to the Derenberger family home, especially to Woody. Over the next few years, Indrid would make random and unannounced visits to their house. Tanya stated that the visits got to be so often and you never knew when he was going to pop up that she wasn't allowed to play outside alone anymore without one of her parents being around. And she also said that the minute Cold would show up, her father would either send her inside or send her mother out, call her mother out to come and get her and or her brother and bring them inside. And obviously the mother did not like this random unannounced visits by an alien and his buddies. I don't know. I don't think I'd like it that much either, to be honest. Yeah, you heard me right, with his buddies, because after the first encounter, Cold never appeared, never showed up alone ever again. There were usually two visitors that Cold brought with him, and they were usually dressed all in black with the top coat and the silver metallic shirt thing underneath with black slacks. Tanya claimed that she would be playing in her yard, either with or without her father, and all of a sudden, Indrid Cold and two other men who looked just like him would suddenly be there, but either from her mother immediately whisking her away, her father immediately sending her inside, or probably, most likely because everything was being done telepathically, she never heard anything at all that they were talking about. Neither the family nor Woody ever got comfortable or used to these visits by Cold, and despite his constant reassurances, none of them ever, relaxed or, again, got comfortable with his presence or the presence of these other two that would come with him. I want to take a minute to point out why some experts have grouped Indrid Cold in with the Men in Black, and I want to make it very clear that I am not buying it. I do not think he was an MIB. They point to the top coat and the grinning. Men in Black usually are reported to have a very cold and seemingly strange grin on their face, according to this documentary. However, that's a characteristic in all of my extensive research I have never once come across. Now, I've come across research stating that they might, for a second, have like this kind of creepy grin on their face when they're threatening you, but not that they just stare with this crazy grin all the time. I just don't understand where this information is coming from that the MIB look like this or do this. Plus, although the MIB can seemingly read your mind and communicate telepathically, they're also sometimes known to speak. The ones whose lips aren't painted on with red lipstick, anyway. Though I'm sure just from researching all of this that the effect on Woody and his family was life-altering. It's actually a fact that it not only changed their views on alien life forms, UFOs, are we alone in the universe, questions which so many people back in the 50s and 60s were asking, right? It also had a very real physical and mental effect on Woody himself. In the wake of these events throughout the years, seemingly starting with the night of the first encounter, little by little, Derenberger started to develop a very keen sense of ESP. It started off with little things that he would catch or like know were going to happen, and got stronger and stronger as after each visit had occurred. His wife was extremely freaked out and concerned with this because if she would go out to the stores or out shopping or out to lunch with a friend, when she got home, and remember, there were no cell phones or surveillance cameras around back then, for the general public anyway, Woody would be able to tell her who she went with, who she spoke to, what she ate, what she bought, what she looked at but she didn't buy, which shop she went to. I mean, he would be able to tell her the whole day as if he were seeing it through her eyes. He became telepathic. By the time Indrid Cold stopped visiting, and I know it took years and years, decades for him to stop visiting, Woody Derenberger was just amazingly psychic. Now that we've heard the story of Woody Derenberger, which was really important to me because this Indrid Cold entity really freaks me out. I'm still not done researching him, so be prepared for another video in the very near future. I just can't stop thinking about it and I want more information. Let's talk a bit about what some experts believe Indrid Cold and the MIB really are. Custodians of Earth, alien life forms coming here to perhaps push our evolution in the right direction. I'm also coming out with a video on the alien hybrid program, which I do believe exists. I'm going to have expert testimony, but why would they be pushing our evolution in the right direction? Because allegedly, and I'm only going to give you a little taste of this until the actual video on it, the Greys used to be just like us. Skeptic experts say that with all the galaxies and planets and stars in the entire universe, right? The odds of a race being that similar as the Greys are to humans is impossible. But it's not impossible. And that's why abductees are being taken and these experiments are being drawn on them because they were just like us. They lived on a planet just like Earth. What happened was they traded pretty much their humanity for technology. They got so technologically advanced, but they ended up destroying their world and had to move underground. And eventually they morphed into this bizarre looking, giant-headed, what we know as the Greys. So now they have this hybrid program, which is the reason they've been abducting people all of these years, because they need our DNA. Their DNA was genetically just altered through the loss of their basic humanity. That's why when they say to these abductees, it won't hurt and it causes incredible amounts of pain, not to mention the trauma, the lifelong trauma that it causes, they don't remember what that is. I'm getting off track. I'm excited for that video. It's coming in the next month or so. Alien hybrid program. So anyway, moving on. Maybe they're here to make sure we don't make the same mistakes as they did. Maybe they care because they need our DNA to save their race. After everything I learned researching this hybrid program, I mean, I don't trust humans. You think I'm going to trust some alien? No, bro. Like, I'm just saying. It's said by a lot of experts that the MIB have always been around, seemingly shaping important events here on Earth, even shaping seemingly unimportant things as well. Coincidences? Synchronicities? No. It's all Men in Black related, at least in their view. It seems to people who believe in this theory that these creatures are somehow related to us, something we don't understand, but that they do very, very clearly. Maybe the MIB are a form of alien race. Maybe they're the hybrids, right? From what I know, the hybrids look a lot more human than MIB are said to, but maybe they're the old generation of hybrids, which is why they just started popping up in like, what, the 40s and 50s? Maybe they're the most familiar looking to us, so they're able to kind of walk amongst us. I mean, I don't know. This is all speculation from me with the research I'm doing on the hybrid program, so I had to kind of mention that. Was the encounter with Woody Derenberger Indrid Cold's first chance to actually speak with a human? Because nobody else, from what I can see, despite the Elizabeth, New Jersey, and the other poltergeist activity in West Virginia, I couldn't find any other interactions with what I believed was Indrid Cold, like this same entity. I just couldn't find any. And again, I don't know why those other two were grouped in with the Indrid Cold documentary, but they were. So if you guys know of any other interactions with Indrid Cold besides Woody Derenberger's and what they're saying happened in Elizabeth, New Jersey, and in the other part of West Virginia, please send me a link. Let me know. While some believe the MIB to be benevolent and harmless, despite the many threats made in an attempt to silence witnesses, if you remember in my second video, I was talking about how, yeah, they make these threats, but when do you ever hear about them carrying it out? I was talking about how, as far as we know, the MIB never made good on any of these death threats. But then I was like, wait a minute, Gemma, that's as far as we know. Why wouldn't that be covered up too? What's particularly interesting about the majority of the MIB encounters is the reported sense of absolute fear and dread that overtakes the person they're coming into contact with. And this reminds me so much of the BEK, the Black Eyed Kids, which, as you guys know, is my #1 paranormal fear besides demons. The MIB are always reported to be very intimidating to the people they come into contact with. It doesn't seem to be just because of the threats they make either. It's how they look. They look very official, very authoritative. They've been described as, quote, pale-faced ghouls, end quote, and even as vampires. We're about to get into encounter stories, but I just want to go over one more thing first. Could the MIB actually be ancient evil, the oldest form of evil there is, the purest form? Could they be the messengers of Satan himself? Yeah, I'm talking demons here. There's a whole subculture of people who think that MIB are demons. There are people who think the BEK are demons as well, and they have their reasons. Some of it to me is credible and makes sense, and some of it not so much. There is allegedly evidence, though, that this could possibly be the case with the MIB. There is a reverend in Lincoln, Nebraska named Ray Boucher, and he was interviewed about this phenomenon and how it could be linked to demons, to entities called forth by the devil himself. Here's some of what he had to say. Keep in mind that Boucher is not just an ordained pastor of 25 years, he's also a paranormal investigator, which I think is awesome. He says that although he had investigated countless reports of people who had encounters with MIB, he never in a million years guessed he would have one himself. Only admittedly, his was a lot different than what we normally hear. In 1987, Boucher states that he was with some colleagues going through all of his MIB research, all of the reports that he had read. He was having his colleagues help him put these tons and tons of papers into some kind of legible order so that he can go through them and kind of get them organized so he can start doing further research into them. So they were going through all of this paperwork with no computers. It was like a hand-done job. They were specifically working on the encounter of Herbert Hopkins, Dr. Herbert Hopkins, which I covered, I believe it was in part 1. I'll skim through for those of you who haven't watched that one yet, but I do suggest you watch parts 1 and 2. You can watch it after this one. It's really no kind of order. So this doctor, Dr. Hopkins, was hypnotizing people and recording their experiences through hypnosis of not only their UFO or alien encounters, but also of the MIB encounters that surely followed, right? So he's hypnotizing them to get into the deepest part of their minds and their brains and documenting it. He was definitely on to something. He had obtained massive amounts of research throughout the years, documented sources and facts, right? So once again, I'm not going to retell the whole story, but basically he was in his office one night going through his research when he received a phone call. The phone call was from a man stating that he worked with a magazine and wanted to come out and interview Hopkins about his research. Hopkins said, yeah, that would be fine. Let's set it up. And then all of a sudden there was a knock on his door. This was long before cell phones. It was an MIB. This is the story I'm sure most of you heard about the MIB telling Hopkins if he did not get rid of his research, he had taken a penny and he had made it disappear. He made it explode. And he told Hopkins, if you don't stop your research, never talk about this again and burn it, that's what's going to happen to your heart. And he left. So Hopkins did. He burned it and he really never spoke of his research ever again. So anyways, Reverend Ray and his colleagues were going through and putting together the Hopkins file. He says he began to feel extremely uncomfortable and uneasy out of nowhere. They were laughing, they were jovial, they were talking, you know, kind of having a good time while doing this research, this putting together of the documents. Even though it was tedious, they were excited to get it done so they could move forward in the research. But all of a sudden, something wasn't sitting right. He says no sooner had he started feeling this way when the table they were working on, this really heavy and very long rectangular shaped table, started violently shaking. He states that the drinking glasses set on the table crashed to the floor and shattered, and a crucifix on the wall tipped over and also fell to the ground. So this has to mean the entire room was violently shaking, right? Not just the table, because the crucifix wasn't attached or connected to the table in any way. That's what I took from it. There was allegedly a giant spider, and to what species, I'm unsure, but I think it looked like a tarantula. It was gigantic. The spider suddenly morphed somehow into a giant shadow on the wall. And you may be thinking along the lines, of course, a giant spider would have a gigantic shadow. And maybe it would. But what happened next was the shadow of the spider suddenly morphed into a terrifying demonic entity. Just a shadow of one, but huge, lurking, hulking, and demonic. It just hovered there in front of the wall. Ray says that a terrible fear just gripped all of them and they were pretty much paralyzed with it. He said he knows that they all experienced the exact same thing that night, so forget about some kind of hallucination or bad dream or nightmare. And he said obviously he was awake. The evil entity vanished almost as quickly as it had appeared, seemingly feeling as though it had done its job in giving this terrible, petrifying fear into these researchers. Was that a warning? A warning to back off. According to Boucher, the reason, aside from his encounter, that he believes the Men in Black phenomenon to be more of a demonic thing than any other theory is because he says they seem to be more of a supernatural being than an alien one. See, I think, and this is just my opinion, that his job title and his religion, being that he is an expert in both fields, I think that might have influenced his theory a little bit. Now, I 100% believe that they saw this demonic entity on the wall, and I do believe perhaps it was a warning for them to back off the research for whatever reason, but I don't believe that MIBs are demons. I don't believe that BEK are demons either. I'm a Christian. That's just my belief. I believe in demons. They're the scariest thing in the world to me, but I do not believe that MIB are demons. If you disagree, let me know in the comments below, but be sure to let me know why. I mean, in the grand scheme of things, though, it makes just as much sense as any other theory, right? Clyde Lewis, the host of a very popular paranormal radio show, also had an encounter with an MIB that gave me absolute chills. It also made me wonder about the whole demon or vampire angle, to be honest. Lewis says he was walking down the street one night. It was very late at night, so there were all shops and stores, but everything was closed down. It was very quiet, but it was a well-lit street. And he said suddenly he got the feeling he was being followed. He saw in the reflection of one of the glass windows of one of the shops a man dressed in all black with a fedora hat and a thin tie just standing by him a few yards away and staring at him. According to Lewis, the man seemed like he wanted Lewis to know he was there. Like he was following him, but not being very inconspicuous about it. Personally, I think for entities such as the MIB that can seemingly make themselves appear and disappear at will, I'm sure there was a way he could have followed Clyde Lewis without getting caught, but he did get caught in the reflection of glass. So obviously he wanted Clyde to know he was there. That's the intimidation tactic, right? So Clyde thinks he might be seeing things, and as soon as he sees the reflection, he turns around to where the reflection is coming from to make sure he's not going crazy, and he actually does see a man in black standing there. This time, though, the MIB was in no way grinning. Lewis says that the MIB was standing extremely still. He was unblinking and definitely looked like he did not belong there. He was dressed inappropriately for the time and was just very out of place looking. This is when a girl came out of nowhere, seemingly oblivious to the presence of the man in black, and asked him if she could bum a cigarette. Clyde told her he didn't smoke. She got an attitude, puffed, and stormed off. And when Clyde turned back around, the MIB was gone. He was gone from behind Lewis, but when Lewis turned around to keep walking very fast in the direction that he was going to get to his desired location, the MIB was standing now directly in front of him. So in the blink of an eye, this thing went from behind him to directly in front of him. This is when Lewis takes out his cell phone, points the camera directly at the MIB, and snaps a couple of pictures. The MIB did not shy away from the cell phone being pointed at him, probably knowing a picture was being taken. When Clyde looked at the picture right there on the spot, there was no MIB in it. It was everything else, but no MIB. So this reminded me of what we hear about demons and about vampires and how they cannot be, their pictures cannot be taken. So yeah, that was one thing that led me to kind of question my adamancy about them not being either one. I just don't know. I lean more towards they're aliens, definitely. I don't think, in my opinion, that they're government agents, and I definitely really don't think they're demonic or vampires. So in this picture, there was no shape or outline of a man. There was nothing to indicate anything or anyone was standing in this picture. Even whatever was, like, I'm sitting in a chair. So if you took a picture of me and I didn't show up, this is how it was. He saw the chair, even though the MIB was blocking, you know, whatever he was leaning against. What he was leaning against was visible in the picture. Does that make sense? That's like the best way I can explain it. Clyde also states that the flash didn't go off when he took this picture, which was weird because it was very dark. I mean, it was a well-lit street, but it was still dark enough that the flash should have automatically went off, as it did on his cell phone camera, but the flash did not go off either. Almost like the picture went right through the guy. Now, Lewis never mentioned specifically, at least in this interview I saw with him, why he thought he would be being followed by an MIB, but he was the host of a very popular paranormal radio show, so one can only assume maybe he had been talking a lot about aliens, UFO phenomenon activity reports, or even the MIB themselves. This is pretty scary to me. What's this video about? What have I done 2 other videos on? And this one is definitely a lot more in-depth than my other 2. I did a lot more research. The last two were just stories, just kind of a baseline video gearing up for something like this so I can move into the video about the hybrid program. A little bit scary, guys. I don't need any visits from any MIB, whether they're alien, government, demonic, vampiric, or what. One of the things about the Men in Black is that you never actually know when they're coming. Are they part of some secret government agency? And if so, which government? Whose government? Is it a collective government? Like, are the MIBs in Russia from the Russian government and the MIBs in America from the American government? Are they humans who are just, as I mentioned in part 2, very weird because they can't talk about their work with other people and all the things they're probably privy to? It might just blow someone's mind and make them a strange individual. Are they some sort of shadow organization? Could they really be aliens or extraterrestrials? Some even think they could be interdimensional beings. But then why do they come here? Are they time travelers from the future? Then why aren't they giving us warnings? The only warnings they're giving us is to stop talking about UFO phenomenon, alien phenomenon, MIBs. It seems to make the most sense to me that they have something to do with aliens and UFO phenomenon, because that's obviously when they always make their appearances, is after a witness sees something or someone doing research into these things tends to get too close. While Woody Derenberger's encounter has become somewhat legendary since the audio interview from the day after the initial encounter has resurfaced after being lost for decades, there are so many other reports of Men in Black encounters which are just as interesting. And again, I don't believe Indrid Cold is an MIB encounter. I don't think he was an MIB. I think he's something else completely. Maybe, I don't know why Derenberger wouldn't get a visit from the MIB after getting a visit from Indrid Cold. I mean, that's a major alien event to have someone like Indrid Cold visiting you for decades, right? And giving you all of this information. He did give Woody information as to where he was from. I didn't put all of that in here. This video is long enough. So I do wonder why Woody was never threatened with or by the MIB if he's receiving these visits from this alien, Indrid Cold, for decades. And he somehow gained, extrasensory perception from these encounters. He was exchanging information with an extraterrestrial telepathically in front of his family. So I've covered multiple MIB encounters in the first 2 videos, but I wasn't going to cover any in this video. I wanted to make it about Indrid Cold and just MIBs in general, what they are. But I came across at least one that really scared me, and it wasn't really the MIB encounter that scared me. It was what came before it and prompted the MIB encounter. The search for answers about the MIB could go back centuries, and although the sightings and encounters could span the earth and take you through every single country and culture, stories of the MIBs themselves, as we have come to know them, or just stories of dark and sinister devils taking the shape of black-clad men, it's also incredibly varied that it's almost impossible to know exactly what we're dealing with here. I mean, forget almost. It's impossible to know exactly what we're dealing with. It is a lesser known fact that the MIB seem to either attract or cause poltergeist phenomenon. I did not know that until doing this research. That's a lot of the reason many people feel they're ghosts or specters of some kind, because they are known to cause like lights to bust out or, electronics to mess up. For more than 50 years, reports of aliens and UFO phenomenon had come from every single state, town, city, county, etc. in the United States. Just the United States alone we're talking about here. There have been so many claims about UFOs come across in the last half century that it's pretty hard to deny or ignore at this point, right? Like, there's so much video and photographic evidence at this point. Even if you got to get rid of all the stuff that's fake, the real documented as fact video and photo evidence and witness testimony evidence, you can't ignore it anymore, and it's getting really hard to deny, as I said. As we know, investigating any sort of UFO activity or phenomenon comes with dangers all its own. That's where the MIB come into play. Experiencers, as they've come to be called sometimes, need to always look over their shoulder, like for the rest of their lives. Because what I also found out in this video is that the MIB don't just visit you once. Even if you comply with what they're telling you to do, or, you know, if you don't do what they're threatening you to not do, they still continue to come back and like haunt you and threaten you. It's kind of like a game to them. As if the trauma of experiencing an alien encounter or a UFO sighting isn't enough, you have to deal with worrying about your life or the life of your family just for being in the wrong place at the wrong time. MIB encounters go back to the very first flying saucer or UFO sightings. The sighting of Harold Dahl, where the dog was ended up killed. That's in video number 1, and this video is getting so long, I can't even really skim through it. But if you go back and watch either the first or second video, sorry guys, I really don't know, the story of Harold Dahl is in there. So go and check it out. This was the first report where someone claimed to have been threatened by the MIB. So here's the last part of this video. Stan Gordon is a UFO researcher who started tracking the events in the early 1970s. UFO events, alien events, Men in Black events. In Pennsylvania, right around this time, there seemed to be a massive inundation of UFO phenomenon in sightings. To this day, it's still unprecedented. Gordon states in an interview, quote, "All of a sudden, it was like an invasion. It was just report after report after report coming in," end quote. The numbers actually got into the thousands at one time. It was in the midst of all these sightings that Stan Gordon realized that he was the one being tracked down by the Men in Black. On August 24th, 1973, at a trailer park in Derry, Pennsylvania, a woman and her son were inside of their trailer when from the back of the trailer they heard some scratching sounds as though some kind of animal were scratching its claws down back and forth against their trailer. At the same time, they heard a sound which sounded like an extremely loud crying baby. So the mother immediately rushes to the front door of the trailer and she opens it, ready to investigate what the strange noises are, when she sees standing directly in front of her a very tall humanoid creature with bright, glowing eyes. And the reenactment for this on his documentary was scary AF. Like, it creeped me out. She claimed it was very broad shoulders and over 6 feet tall. Obviously, she was terrified. She turned around and immediately locked the door. Went into the back of the trailer back to protect her son. Her neighbors in the trailer park heard her and her son essentially screaming bloody murder, and they're the ones who called the authorities. The woman couldn't call the authorities herself because it seemed like whatever the creature was, it was attracted to the trailer's electrical supply, because immediately upon her closing and locking the door after she saw this creature, it pulled out the electricity out of like the box that's in front of these trailers. I don't know if trailer parks still have this. I highly doubt it. But there was like these boxes where like the electricity would come from and go into the trailer. It ripped this right out and all of her electricity went off. So can you imagine seeing this over 6 foot tall, extremely, at least 3 to 4 feet wide, broad shoulders, glowing bright blue eye, humanoid thing standing in front of you, making a noise like an extremely loud crying baby and growling at you. And then the minute you go inside, your electricity goes off. I mean, that's got to be terrifying. By the time the police got there, the creature had long since departed, but it did, however, leave behind some kind of sticky goo-like substance on the door handle. So apparently when she went back inside and locked the door, this thing had enough intelligence to try and turn the knob. So the police questioned the woman, her son, and some of the neighbors. The police found some very unusual footprints, took the report, and were on their way. Stan and his crew were there too, and they told the woman to hold on to the goo-like substance until they can pick it up later. I don't know why Stan didn't take it with him at that point, but he didn't. No sooner did Stan and the authorities and the neighbors leave, they all went back into their house, they took off, then the woman heard a knock at the door. She called Stan later in the evening to confirm kind of that he had sent someone to her house to collect the goo evidence, and he was like, no, I didn't send anybody there. And she was like, somebody came and said that they were working for you, and she described this person as an MIB. She said not only did he tell her that it was okay to give the substance to him, that he was working for Stan, when she held it out to him, he roughly grabbed her arm and held it tight and hurt her and looked her right in the eye and told her, like, there's no reason for you to tell anybody about this, and took off. That same night, a young kid from the trailer park was outside with his Polaroid, camera. And you remember those? And he was taking a picture of these weird and bizarre alien footprints. As soon as he pulled the picture out and started, remember he had to shake it to develop it, an MIB comes literally out of nowhere. And the kid said, I was just taking a picture. And the MIB grabs the picture and says, no, you were just taking us a picture, and walks off with the picture. So there was no evidence left over except for the eyewitness testimony of this alien encounter that night. And it seemed to be a very dangerous and creepy alien. It was no Indrid cold, right? That is scary. The boy who the MIB took the picture from also claimed that the man made a bizarre comment, which was something to the effect of, quote, now it has been destroyed, end quote. Obviously, as I mentioned earlier, this adds an even extra amount of mental stress on these witnesses, even more sometimes than the actual encounters themselves, because not only do they have to be fearful of what they have encountered, but now they have to worry about the threats made by the men in black against their lives, or usually the lives of the people they love. One never knows when or where an MIB will pop up next. They're like ghosts in that they seem to appear and disappear without a trace, and you never know when they're coming. They're here one minute and gone the next, and I still don't understand, and I don't think many people do, if anyone knows at all, what their actual objective is. Why do they need so badly to silence the witnesses to these UFO phenomenons, or even just the people who talk about it, like a radio host? Many speculate, though, and in my opinion, them being a part of some kind of alien cleanup crew makes kind of perfect sense, because they always seem to come after like a spaceship crashes, right? Like I think I said in the first one, do other aliens look and they're like, oh, there goes Tom again, he crashed, now the humans are gonna know we're here? Like, yeah, I don't know, but that's when the MIB usually show up. So that's all I have for you today, guys. Be sure to let me know what you think in the comments below. Be sure to let me know what you know in the comments below. I'm always looking for more information. I cannot wait to get started with the alien hybrid video. Please be sure to like. Guys, my likes are in the single digits or the double digits, and my views are in the hundreds. So if you guys can please help me out there. Again, I'm sorry, I really didn't feel good today. I almost didn't even get through this video. I had to stop several times, as you can see by the camera angle kept changing. So sorry about all this. Please be sure to subscribe if you haven't already. I'm getting closer every day to that 1,000. Check out the description box for some really important links. One being to join my Patreon, become a patron for early access to videos and eventually a special Patreon only content videos. Click the link below. If you want to make a one-time donation for how much or how little as you want, also the link directly to my PayPal is also in the description box. And please be sure to go and check out mine and Steve Stockton's podcast, Strange Things with Steve Stockton and Gemma Jade. We've been on a hiatus for a couple of months now, working on the book, working on the live stream, but we are going to put something out in the next couple of weeks. Thank you guys so much for hanging out with me today, for sharing this time with me. I really hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you find this kind of stuff interesting. Again, like, comment, subscribe, share, and I will see you guys next time. Have your best day. Be kind to each other. It doesn't cost anything and can gain you so much. Have your best night, and bye-bye. Mwah.